Hello and welcome to the High Maintenance Hippie podcast. This is your host, Ashley from Ashley Taylor Wellness. On this podcast, we talk about all things beauty, health, wellness, and optimization. Being a high maintenance hippie represents not being boxed in, as I strongly believe that one size does not fit all. I'm a nurse turned coach, and I have learned so much about both conventional and alternative options, and I want to help you expand your options. I'm here to inspire you to learn new ways to improve your quality of life and to take your power back. I'm so excited that you're here, so let's get started. Hello, and welcome back to the High Maintenance Hippie podcast. Today's guest is Freddie Kimmel, and I'm so excited that he's here. He is the host of the Beautifully Broken podcast. He has been able to move through metastatic cancer, a mold, and Lyme diagnosis. So as Freddie said, it is a triple threat. All three of those things individually are a lot to go through, but having all of that was something that Freddie had to deal with. And I'm going to ask him more about his story and what he learned and some big takeaways. So I really hope that this adds value to your life. And I'm so excited that you're here. So thank you, Freddie.
It is my honor to be here. And I love the name of your podcast, High Maintenance Hippie. I was like, man, that is gold.
Oh, thanks. Yeah. I mean, I just don't want people to feel boxed in. And I just felt like I like getting dressed up and doing all that. But then I also want relationships with substance. And it just felt so all or nothing. And like, maybe there's a middle ground. So that's what it represents to me. So thank you.
Yeah, it's a great title.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So we were just chatting a little bit before we got started. And first thing, I could not believe your age because you shared it with me. And if you're watching this, there's video, if you watch on YouTube. I am 36. I just proudly turned 36, grateful to be alive. And Freddie, are you comfortable sharing how old you are?
Yeah, I'm 45, but I'll be 46 in February.
Wow. Chronologically, but not necessarily biologically or your epigenetic age, which we'll talk a little bit more about. But I mean, what a testament to not only surviving as people, that's their goal, but I really see you thriving. And I've seen you at conferences. We actually met at a biohacking conference in Florida. I think it was in Orlando.
Yep.
And just, you can see the passion coming out of you. You're such a light. And I just love how you have taken your power back. And I'm sure you're helping a lot of people. So can you start with a little bit about you and what your life was like and what got you started on this journey?
Yeah, thank you. So I would say, I was really never interested in health. I was something I never considered, never imagined what was life. What did that look like if health was taken away? And I had moved to New York City in 2001 to be a Broadway performer. I can tell you it was really aligned with, I didn't like to get up early. And I love the idea of rolling into a theater at 6:30 at night and working for a few hours and then going out with my friends and then sleeping the whole day. And it was, as you know, it's very, very competitive to be a performer. I mean, Broadway is it's like 1% of all people. So I had, my parents were devastated. They were like, oh my God, this kid does not have a backup dream. He's going to go sing and dance. What? He's not. I mean, and I had a good voice, was not super, super talented in any of those things. But I happened to set down my bags and I went to my first audition for a Broadway tour and I booked it. So I was immediately inundated, I'm working with all these incredible dancers and singers and I'm learning so much. And it was your dreams were unfolding for me. I was 23, couldn't believe it was happening. I was the time of my life. I'm getting paid to tour on the country, perform in this tour of Annie Get Your Gun. So many fun people, friends, experiences. And I had had this event. I moved to the city in 2001 in October. So September 11th, it just happened. The buildings are smoldering. I'm kind of walking around and learning the city in my first few months there. And one morning I woke up and I could barely close my hands. I could barely bend my knees. Terrible full body rheumatoid arthritis type symptoms. And nobody could really figure out what was going on. I was very young, so I sort of just ate Advil and indomethacin and then progressed to Plaquenil and was just taking painkillers to get through the pain and be able to do my job. Mm-hmm. And I did that for about 3 years until I wandered into an emergency room with really bad belly pain. And emergency room referred me to St. Luke's. I went up the street to the hospital, emergency room. They put me into urology and did scans and an MRI. Finally, I wound up in this room with a team of doctors. And someone had walked into the room and they're just like, look, this is a male with advanced testicular cancer. And that's how I learned that I had cancer. Nobody had even told me. They walked in, someone read my chart, had this massive freak out. And I got on a plane immediately, flew home to be with my parents, and went right to the emergency room. I was in so much pain. And when I walked in and met with a team and met with oncologists, we learned that the testicular cancer in the left testicle had metastasized to all the lymph nodes in my peritoneum. There was a tumor that was growing around my vena cava, going back to my heart, my left kidney. I mean, I remember looking at the scan. I was like, it was too much to process. You're just like, okay. And so it was like, we're going to do a surgery, take out the primary tumor. The masses in your belly are too big to operate on. We're going to do as much chemo as we can do. We'll see what happens after that. Did all the chemo, and there were still spots on the MRI. So I remember being very devastated, and they're like, great, this is what happens next. We're going to do a retroperitoneal lymph node dissection. So we are going to go from sternum to pelvis. We're going to open up your belly. We'll take your organs out. We'll put those in a bag, and then we'll cut away the cancer. We'll put everything back, and we'll staple you back up. And this is what we did. We did this crazy procedure. It's one of the more complicated procedures. I was in the operating room for I think 8 to 10 hours straight. You know, amazing surgeons, amazing medical team, and probably like a week later, I was declared cancer free. So it was a very storybook.
Mm-hmm.
I'm in the room. I'm in intensive care. My whole family's in the room. Everybody's holding my hand. My doctor walks in. We got the pathology. Everything we took out was necrotic. You're cancer free. And I was kind of imagining in my head, I was like, oh, this is where, you know, you go back to New York, you're on Oprah, you're going to write a book, you're going to empower other men to like better know their bodies, not to ignore the signals.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when things honestly really started to get hairy. I developed this thing known as abdominal adhesions, where post-surgical scar tissue complications would grow around my small intestine. I would be rushed to the emergency room. I would either lie in level 10 pain and vomiting for 3 days, or they would open up my belly and they would take out whatever piece of small intestine was completely obstructed. I did that. I mean, this is 2007. I started going to 2015 was my last surgery. So it was a really long time of being on this wheel of life or death. Immune system crashed, chronic fatigue syndrome, bought a house with black mold in it, found terrible. You can imagine, if we talk about terrain theory, the stress and what my body had been through, everything crashed, and I was just so very sick. So to be honest with you, it took that severity of an experience to make me empowered to drastically take back my health.
Yeah.
Everything that you and I believe in, it's forged in the fires of I had no other choice, right? I watch you post all these videos of coffee enemas, and I'm like, yeah, that was how I went to the bathroom, because there was so much scar tissue around my colon. Like I couldn't even go to the bathroom for a long time. Like that's something I'm like so proud of. I was like, I can poop again and it's healthy.
Yeah.
And you never realize, you're like, pooping's like up there with sex. Like an amazing poop is like, and maybe your audience doesn't feel that way, but I feel that way. So thankful to have that skill back, but it's doing things that would never be offered in a doctor's office. They're not going to tell you to do a coffee enema. They're going to say,
Yes.
no, let's do these bowel laxatives, and this one will turn it to water, and this one will contract your colon, and you'll just keep squirting out poop. You know, terrible options, really, when you look at the functionality of the body. But that's the long, very short version of how I got so passionate about health, because I had to be.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned 3 things: metastatic cancer, mold, and Lyme, but also bowel obstructions. I mean, that's awful. Did you ever have to have an NG tube or anything like that?
Oh, yeah. Good friends
Yeah.
with the NG tube.
That is the one thing as a nurse, I hope that I never have to experience, also chemotherapy, but it's for anyone listening. If you don't know what that is, it's a tube that goes into your nose and all the way down into your belly, usually pretty long, from the nose to the tip of the ear down to the belly. And patients will say, oh, this hurts my throat. When can I get this out? But if you take it out too soon, you have to put it back in. It's awful. And from what I recall, I haven't worked in a hospital since 2021, but you probably weren't being fed if you had a bowel obstruction, but what they give people as far as nutrition, it's just a joke. So, I mean, what was your experience with nutrition in hospitals and even
Well,
in oncology?
the big one was that retroperitoneal lymph node dissection. So essentially, you're waiting for the bowels, this is a nurse, you're waiting for the bowels to wake back up. You're waiting
Mm-hmm.
really to like pass gas. And then it's like, oh, we can start to try you on some food. So my body wasn't waking back up after surgery. I'm trying to remember. It was a condition called third spacing, in
Okay.
which the fluid doesn't want to absorb back into the bowels. They're asleep. They're in an ileus essentially from all the anesthesia or whatever the trauma to the body. So it was like 10 days of having no food, no water, NG tube down your throat, being totally awake. It was truly like beyond. I'm like, if there's hell, that's what it was. So I had this really funny thing with my NG tube. I was going crazy watching people walk in and out of my room with like drinks and coffee and Powerades, and I was like, dude, you got to get those. I'm gonna go crazy. I'm gonna rip that out of your hand. So one day somebody left a blue Powerade next to me, and I just was like, I'm just gonna wet my lips, and I like wet my lips a little bit, and then I was like, fuck it, I'm gonna drink it. I'm like, this NG tube will just suck it out of my stomach. And my doctor came in, and the NG bucket was blue, and he freaked out. He's like, we will not let you out of here if you ever do that again. He's like, that is not what that bucket is for. But of course, it's trying to clear stomach acid because your bowels are not contracting to move that bile down the system. Yeah, it's wretched. I've had a bunch of them. Yeah, not fun. No, I don't
Yeah.
recommend it to anybody.
Yeah. I do not know anyone that has gone through that. So thank you for sharing. And it just, at that time, maybe those were the only and or the best options. And I'm not against surgery. I'm not against drugs. I am grateful for them. There's absolutely a time and a place. I think they're
Yeah.
overused. I think that we don't ask what contributed to this. So do you have any regrets in taking chemotherapy or any of the medications that you took?
Mhm. No, not at all. So testicular cancer is really, it's like chemotherapy is like meant for most testicular tumors. So there's a drug combination. Mine was etoposide and cisplatin, which
Mhm.
is a platinum base, and the other one I think is mushroom base actually. And then there's another one where they do when it's in your lungs. Because typically testicular cancer goes testicle, lymph nodes and peritoneum, lung, brain, and that's what Lance Armstrong had. So the cocktail of chemotherapy is very, very effective. If I had to go back, and I don't wish, I really truly believe cancer is the best thing that's ever happened to me in my whole life. It's Yeah, we wouldn't be here. I wouldn't be having this conversation. I wouldn't be I would never have the worldview that I have now. And it's like my superpower.
Mhm.
I understand what it is to have everything taken away and everything given back because you have a team around you who believes in you. You have a family, you have a support system. And as spiritual lessons go, it's incredible. And I don't wish cancer on anybody, but I do wish you the grace that I've pulled from that experience of being so very sick because it's incredible. I was just on a podcast before this, and I said the woman was also a breast cancer survivor, and she goes, there is an ecstasy on the other side in which no one will ever feel that unless you've been through it. So there's other people that say, we are the lucky ones. And we were talking about, I have a friend going through cancer, and he keeps writing fuck cancer on his posts. I was like, you know, from an NLP perspective or language abracadabra, it's so funny I said that today, abracadabra, with my words I do create. That's Mark England says that a lot. But we don't want to procreate cancer. We don't want to make more cancer. And it's hard to cherry pick life experiences and be like, God, I'm so blessed here. But life fucked me here with the taxes. Or I can't believe I met this person and love came into my life. Oh, but I can't, I really, I'm so angry. I went in that ski weekend and I broke my ankle. Like, I don't think there's a greater power that's like good thing, bad thing, good thing, bad thing. It's like a opportunity always across the board for us to learn, grow, expand, or I don't know. This is just what I operate with. Or
Mhm.
it's a really evil universe that's smiting people and like hurting them. And I don't want that to be my experience. So that's not what I'm not choosing to live in that belief system. long, short story.
Yeah. I mean, I'm glad that you mentioned that, fuck cancer, because the word cancer is still there. And someone was saying that they were praying to be cancer free. And that's great in theory, but for my body to heal, or, what would be a better way to say that than fuck cancer? Because, what we focus on grows and the brain is still hearing that word. So what do you think?
Yeah. I don't think the body makes mistakes, you know. I think it's more, I think for me, it's a
Mm-hmm.
thank you, cancer. Thank you. I had the resources and the ability to slow down and to better know myself. And why did this come up? Like there are so many things that we always in the West we treat disease as a malady. Again, we treat it like it's a bad universe smiting us with an unfortunate event, as opposed to saying there's an experience, there is an environmental toxicant in which your body wanted to put something there and form a little. We're going to park it somewhere. We're going to give it its own
Mm-hmm.
blood supply. The body has this innate ability to put something that we don't want to feel or we can't physiologically deal with, and we're gonna create a space for it. And to me, that's the way I view a tumor. So, we're in this worldview where you do have to deal with a malady, right? But then why did it come there? Was it an emotional trauma? Was it something I didn't want to feel? Was it years and years of abusing drugs and alcohol? Was it a terrible relationship in which I never felt that I could ever speak my truth? Like that is a cancer. Now we have the evidentiary proof to show how the body does manifest disease after severe psychological stress, even generations down the line, looking at Holocaust survivors and the rates of rheumatoid arthritis, fibromyalgia, and that is generationally passed down. So I don't know, but I can only imagine some of the things that, my body had not processed. And I have a few things I was like, and I've had some pretty profound therapy sessions in which I was like, oh, that was a time where I just really chose to shut it off and didn't want to feel something. So
Mm-hmm.
that's my view. I think there's more to it. I do think it's a thank you for me.
Yeah. And that's so beautiful because there's a lesson there. I've never dealt with cancer. In 2018, I was unable to work for 4 months. My whole body was covered in hives, mouth, belly, legs, every inch of my body. My skin started to slough off and it was exposed. So I had to put saline and gauze on there.
Mm,
It was awful. Nothing like what you experienced, but there was no looking into my methylation status, which was huge for changing my quality of life. And it was just, what can you take to make this symptom go away? And it sounds like you and I would agree that the body is trying to tell us something. There's a message here, there's a lesson, and we just play whack-a-mole because we don't want to hear it, or we don't know what to do with that message. I think that's also true. For a lot of people, they're like, I know I need to process grief. I just really don't know how. But unfortunately, time does not heal all wounds. And I think people do believe that. So it sounds like you were
yeah,
very physically fit, right?
yeah, yeah.
So do you think it was related to lifestyle? I mean, we could think about your history. You said of drugs and alcohol, no judgment. I've same. In New York City, I would think there's a lot of terrible lighting. I don't know what that's going to do to our mitochondria and, our cells. But physically, was there anything looking back that you did not prioritize? Or do you think it
Uh,
came from other realms within?
yeah. I mean, I think, I think it's everything. It's
Mm-hmm.
it's
Me
the
too.
straw that breaks the camel's back. I like to think of it as the idea of like we have this, Freddie is a barrel. I'm born with some level of some toxicity passed down from my parents or emotional generational trauma, but then what do I eat growing up? What's my environment? What's my air quality like? What's my interrelating with the outside world? And I think as we carry on more allostatic stress, that spills out of the bucket eventually, and that's your autoimmune. That's your disease. So my short list that I always think about, I had a very traumatic first love, first relationship. That ended terribly. I grew up next to a chemical plant called Diaz Chemical, which very much like Aaron Brockovich, a few years after I graduated, it was shut down.
Where was
So
that?
upstate New York, like
Okay.
between Rochester and Buffalo, the moving to New York City when the towers are smoldering. I mean, I remember coming home from being around the city and just kind of laying on the floor and crying. I mean, and I would not have told you I was emotionally affected, but I'm an empath now that
Yeah.
I did not know that then at all. I would tell you I'm unemotional, pretty joyous kid, but I would pick it up. I would pick up their energy, and I would come back and I would just lay on the bathroom floor and cry. And then I
Mhm.
wouldn't tell anybody about it. And I would go out and, everything was fine. Everything's great. There was a lot, there was a lot that my body was processing. And I think that's a superpower. But at the time, as you said, these are things that we are not taught. We're not taught about trauma in high school. My generation was not. We're not
Mhm.
taught about men don't talk about feelings. We don't talk about owning our responsibility to my response. None of it. So it's raising a child in the past in a true tribal society. The whole village took care in raising a child. And I would imagine that the inefficiencies of a direct parental unit were made up by, Larry and Sally and Susie down the street because you're exposed to so many people. So who knows? But I really do think it's like the cup runneth over with disease. And my gift to learn from was started out with some rheumatoid arthritis like symptoms, which is probably Lyme. Grew up on a farm
Mhm.
outside all day. I don't remember being bit by a tick, but I grew up on a farm, so I'm sure that was in the terrain. And yeah, and the testicular cancer, those are the fires that really lit me up to better know my body.
Yeah. And some of the things you mentioned, and I also did the methylation status. So I'm in the hospital, not as a nurse, but as a patient. And just like you said, there's no other option because what was there wasn't helping. So it did sound like the treatments and the chemotherapy and the surgery helped a lot of collateral damage. In the end, you're grateful for that experience. And I do believe that people can heal without chemotherapy. I also believe that in some cases it is appropriate. So there's just so much all or nothing thinking. And I think our beliefs make a big difference. Like if
Mm.
you choose chemo, but you believe that you're going to die, I think that will affect a person. And I've also found for a lot of people with a lot of conditions, having something to live for, like having a vision of the future, because it can get really hard to just be in that state, and to slow
Mm.
down. You mentioned that you were able to slow down. When I had my chronic health issues, I don't deal with hives or anything like that anymore. But the hardest part for me was slowing down and feeling. I believe that it made me lazy. I thought my emotions were too much. I also didn't learn about them in school. Like, where do we learn about that? So, was slowing down challenging for you?
It was, and I had a lot of grief around not being in New York City and hearing from my friends how life was moving forward without me. And I had joked with my oncologist. I had booked this show to like go to the Kennedy Center and sing for the president, and then I was going to move to Broadway. And it was this is like November when I'm getting diagnosed and we're going through the surgeries, and the show was like in March. I was like, can I be like done with this whole cancer thing and be in this next gig? And he was like, no, you need to change your plans. And I do remember there was like a moment of grief. There was like a couple days where I was just like, fuck, this is so unfair. And I'll be honest with you, I got over that really quick. And I was just like, I'm just going to do the energy and veracity to which I have put towards being a performer is going towards cancer. I'm just going to do this with cancer. So it shifted pretty quickly for me.
Did you imagine yourself healing and being able to help people, or was that after the fact?
Yeah, it's funny. I started a blog while I was going through this with no intention of, I didn't want to do wellness. I wanted to get back to singing, which I do
Mhm.
love. I love to be on stage. I love to perform. It's so fun and it's such a
Mhm.
good community. It really is like a wonderful, wonderful family where I always felt like I very much belonged. Leaving, retiring from theater, and now I realize how much shame I carried in my body. While I never thought I was good enough. Every audition, I always thought I was like, God, you just you're not a leading man. You don't look good enough. You not don't dance good enough. You're not tall enough. There was always I always carried that. This was very interesting to go back and do like a benefit concert now or go sing. And I was like, oh, what's this? There's some dark, dark stuff about I'm judging my voice or how I'm approaching the song. I was like, where is that from? Because you're not doing it. Nobody's cares. It's a
Mhm.
benefit concert. You're not going to get the next job or not. You're just here to perform. But it's been really interesting to feel some of that stuff that is in my body programmed from that time. Imagine every job, maybe it goes for a month, maybe it goes for a year, and then you find another job and you do that for 20 years. every single time a show ends. So it's very stressful. And I don't think nobody talked to me about that. Wasn't a thing to be prepared for. It was just like, I guess this is my reality. I'm just going to hold it in the container and not feel it. So that's been interesting to experience and reflect on as time goes on. But I was so excited to get back. I was so excited. And for sure, that had an effect on how I did with my cancer treatment.
Mm-hmm.
I was just buzzing. I couldn't wait. I was emailing people all the time. I'd say that I really became passionate about health when it was like 3 or 4 years after cancer, a couple surgeries in, I'm in severe, severe pain. And I remember having this incredible success where I had been like, okay, great. Well, let me completely change my diet. And I'd went to a no sugar, no dairy, no gluten, the whole like as clean as you can possibly be. And I
Mm-hmm.
had such a wild reduction in pain in my joints.
Interesting.
I mean, like 70%. And I was like, this is crazy. Cause I was on, I was still on some indomethacin once in a while as needed. I was still on Plaquenil. I was still doing all these other things. Hadn't discovered the root of the autoimmunity, if you will. So that evidentiary proof, I remember it lighting a fire. I was like, man, people need to know about this. This is wild. And every single doctor I would go to and I'd be like, dude, I did this and it worked. They were like, that's cool. We don't really care. Don't
Yeah.
really care. My interaction with a lot of medical teams was like going in and doing follow-up scans. They're like, try to get you to your 5 years of cancer free. So the
Mm-hmm.
whole plan to getting you for free for 5 years of cancer is to go in and let's take a whole body picture. Let's do an MRI and make sure we don't see spots again. And then we'll send you home. We're going to bring you back in 6 months. That's the whole plan. It's kind of like imagine a parent losing their child in a car accident and they like show up to the same spot every 90 days to take a picture. And if they just so happen to catch another accident, they're just going to hand it to the next family. It's like crazy to me. I'm like, that's the plan? Monitoring for a spot to come back? Wild. Given that we know definitively by in the shadow of a doubt that cancer is a metabolic dysfunction.
Mm-hmm.
This is Otto Warburg, right back to wherever he made this discovery and had won the Pulitzer, looking at the cell voltage of a cancer cell, that 70 to 90 millivolts cell has charge, it's healthy, it's robust, it's able to do cellular function. We drop into a state of illness where we're at 50 millivolts, and then cancer is 15 to 20 millivolts. So the cell, it's almost like the battery's out,
Mm-hmm.
and that doesn't happen overnight. You can imagine turning off the power to your house for like 5 years and like the toilets don't flush and the
Mm-hmm.
air conditioning starts to build up mold. And then you wonder all of a sudden why the walls are rotting. That doesn't happen overnight. And the cell works the same way. The drainage system of the body works the same way. The lymphatic system works the same way. And we don't talk about any of these things in oncology. It is truly it's managing sick people. It is
Yeah.
not healthcare at all. So don't conflate healthcare and don't get me on a soapbox.
I love it. Well, it's powerful to share your experience because you have things that didn't feel right for you or could be better, and you're grateful for the experience and parts of it. And I think that's okay. I think that people feel that they're supposed to just blindly go along with whatever. And when you mentioned that's the plan, I'm not against MRIs. I did one, a full body scan, but what are we doing to support the body so that it's not coming back? Was there any regard for nutrition, sleep, detox? No.
Not that's not, and that's today too.
Mm-hmm.
This is not a conversation. My friend is going through chemotherapy right now and radiation, and they're walking him over bottles of Ensure and trying to say, man, just keep you got to keep your weight on, you got to keep eating, which is crazy. Okay, I know it's crazy that
Mm-hmm.
people are walking over like these synthetic proteins and seed oils and canola oils, just horrendous food. Some part of the brain is saying that, that you need to put weight on when you're going through chemotherapy. There's some really good data to support that. In fact, before I would do chemo again, I'd probably be doing a 48-hour fast, shown to be quite neuroprotective towards collateral damage if you're going to do chemo or radiation. And there's enough literature to hand that to your oncologist and at least make the case. And remember, it is your body. You nobody's going to tell you what you can and can't eat. I do like it when I think it's very empowering when your practitioner's on board with
Hmm.
what you're doing for your health, at least from an energetic standpoint, that he's not calling you crazy. And while those studies are slim, it's, it makes sense to me that the body goes into a protective mechanism mode when we go without food for a little bit, and then you can do a refeed. Yeah, unless you're in, the Biomed Center in Phoenix, unless you're in Hope for Cancer down in Mexico, unless you're with, oh goodness, what's her name? Dr. Keneally out on the West
Yeah.
Coast, then you're not going to get that advice.
Hmm.
Yeah.
It's interesting because one of my best friends is healing from breast cancer right now. And that was one of the doctors that was recommended the most, Dr. Keneally and Hope
Hmm.
for Cancer. And I'm trying to think if there was anywhere else. But back then, had you heard of Gerson therapy? Doing coffee enemas. And I don't know if you ever got on board with any of the juicing, but had you heard of that back then?
Not really. I just wasn't in that world
Okay.
at all. Like I said, I wasn't interested in health.
Yeah.
I didn't have time. I was living my life. The internet was different back then. Certainly not what it is today. We didn't have smartphones. I mean, it's funny, coming out of my retroperitoneal lymph node dissection, there were always commercials for the iPhone. And I was like, oh my God, Dad, can I get one? I was like, if I get better, can I get an iPhone? And it was like this glorious thing. So it was just different. The search engines, there were chat rooms. There was not the same level of information that you can get access to today. So it just traveled differently and it wasn't in my circle. So it was really just out of ignorance that I wasn't exposed to those things. I didn't really have anybody in my life that was, that woo hippie
Yeah.
uncle or aunt at all.
Okay. When did you first learn about coffee enemas and when did you do your first one?
I want to say I eventually took my own blood sample because I couldn't get a diagnosis for Lyme, but I knew the inflammatory patterns. When we couldn't find elevated C-reactive protein, when I couldn't find any antinuclear antibodies, ANA, I'm like, why am I so inflamed? Why does it hurt to walk?
Mm-hmm.
And I kept coming up Lyme, Lyme, Lyme. You got to have Lyme. So took Lyme. Of course, it was negative in New York State. And I ended up like learning basically how to draw my own blood, took a blood sample, got a kit, forged a doctor's note, sent it to IGenX in California, and finally got a positive diagnosis for Lyme. So, of course, when you got into that realm, I got a lot of great information from the Lyme community on supporting the body, especially detox pathways. It's so funny because I love, I love podcasts, and the other day Joe Rogan went on a little rant. He's like, oh, this detox. He's like, that's not real. People are so obsessed with detoxing the cell. And I love a lot of what he says, but yesterday I was like, Joe, you got to have somebody really good on here to explain to you how some people in the population do have dysfunctional methylation pathways. They have the HLA phenotypes that does not let them detox from mold or biotoxins. So I have all those genetic snips that make it incredibly hard for me to remove mold and Lyme and whatever spirochete debris as my immune system is waged war against. So I think it was around there. And I remember the first one made me so shaky. I was like, I don't know if you ever experienced this, but I could always drink coffee all day, every day. I could drink coffee at 10 p.m. and go to sleep.
Mm-hmm.
And then after my immune system crashed, it was like it would make me so shaky. My body
Yeah.
temperature would drop. I would get cold. And so I really had to adjust that relationship with caffeine. And at first, coffee enemas did that to me. So I actually I did one. I remember I shook all day. Like I just had like shakes in my hands. And then what did I graduate to? Earl Grey tea. Did Earl Grey tea. And that
Okay.
was like
Interesting.
good. And then I slowly built up like a tablespoon of coffee. And now I could do like 32 ounces. And it's amazing. I just remember having hours and hours of clarity for the first time in a long time. Brain fog really dropped through the floor. And like, I want to say 3 or 4 times.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously I had the scar tissue, which was slowing emptying of the bowel. So I'm sure that was an impacting factor. Man, what a godsend. And
Absolutely.
in that, what really got me into it is when in this journey, like 2017, I had finally like saved up enough money to buy a home. And I should tell that sidebar story.
Mm-hmm.
I was so compromised, throughout New York City and a lot of the stuff I was doing was like, obviously it's all out of pocket. my parents are not helping me at all financially. I'm doing shows in the middle of all that time of doing surgeries. I'm in and out of shows when I can. And I ended up Airbnb-ing one room in my 2-bedroom apartment in New York. And it was like when Airbnb first hit, and it was just a godsend. A godsend. I mean, it let me pay for, if I wanted to go do ozone therapy, if I wanted to go, buy a fancy appointment with an integrative functional medicine practitioner at the time. There were only a few in New York, and they were so expensive. It was ridiculous, from someone that sometimes I had $300 in my bank account, $400. They're $2,000, $1,500 a visit to walk in the door without diagnostic testing. It was just egregious. I still hate functional medicine for that. I not hate. I have deep resentment. Yeah. So, oh shit, where was I? Airbnb, financial, finally bought a home. The home was floor to ceiling, black mold. I lived in it for 6 months, and all my symptoms started to get worse and worse. And I was like, wait, nothing's working. I'm doing ozone injections. I'm doing coffee enemas. I'm fasting. I'm elite paleo diet, and everything's getting worse. I was like, what the fuck? So finally, I hired contractors to come. They cut into a wall, and I was standing there when they did it. Horrible, horrible. Don't do that. Be out of the house when they cut in your wall. Yeah. And they opened. It was like a birthday cake of like black mold chunks all the way up. I mean, unlivable. So I was my cognitive ability. I was like forgetting words. I would look at people and I'd be like, what were we saying? Like I would forget my words. Really, really scary. And that was really quickly, every time I would do a coffee enema, I would have my cognition back. The pain would be diminished. It was so helpful. And again, love-hate relationship with coffee enemas. I could never find any literature online to validate that, that was a good thing. I know everybody always says it's your lived experience, which is 100% valid. But people will often say, well, it boosts glutathione in the liver. And like every study I've ever looked at, they disconfirm that. They're like, no, that doesn't happen. We've never measured an increase. I know it comes down to who's doing the study, who's doing the science, but man, do they feel good. And I still do like one a week. I used to do them all the time for years.
Yeah, I have the same experience where mental clarity, I don't drink alcohol often, maybe like once or twice a month. But if I do, and I do a coffee enema that night, I will sober right up and I feel great in the morning. Very interesting.
Yeah.
So I do think that there are positive benefits. I don't think one size fits all, but it has been such a life changer for me, obviously. I'm diehard. Yeah. And, when you saw that wall or when they saw that wall, did they have a reaction to it?
Yeah. They said, run.
Okay.
They literally were like, go, get your stuff. I was like, I was in a show at the time. I was like making my smoothie or my lunch. I was like, I'll be right out. I took my sweet ass time in the apartment. Yeah, it was rough. It really set me back for a little while.
I mean, that's starting your life over in a way on 2 different occasions. In one sense you had to rebuild, but this is the first home that you owned as well.
Yeah. Such a bummer.
Yeah. And
I had true heartache with that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, I loved it. It was a beautiful home. I'd put in these nice floors, and it was, I Airbnb'd a bedroom in that too. It was a source of income. It continued to allow me to invest in my education. And, through all this, I'm going to like Institute for Functional Health Coaching and International Sports Science and University of Colorado for gut health. And, throughout these 10 years, 12 years or whatever, I'm continuing to go through different programs just to better know the body, to better understand my healing, really. So it was a lot of heartache, and I didn't want to. I dragged my feet through the remediation, which was 40 grand. I dragged my feet through throwing things away, that I had had my whole life, that they were like, you can't. I would touch things. I would touch things like a paper or a bill that had been in the apartment, and I would like start crying because I had such a strong emotional reaction to the spores on the paper. It was wild. It was
Yeah.
wild. I never would be, it makes a great case with the storyline in Superman when he can't be near kryptonite, because that is exactly what it's like. I tell this one story of going to Target one time to get some cleaning. I was like, well, maybe I can clean some of it. And I walked into the cleaning aisle, and the off-gassing of chemicals in Target in the cleaning aisle took me right to my knees. And a family
Yeah.
came over that I knew from the theater, and they saw me on the floor on my knees. They're like, Freddie, what's the matter? Like, they looked at me like I was so pathetic. They were like, what's going on with you? And I was just like, all I could do is cry. I mean, it was a low point. Target in Edgewater, New Jersey.
I can
Bobby
smell it
Creighton's
from
wife.
here.
Oh God.
What's really interesting about a lot of these things are a lot of misconceptions. One that I live in Scottsdale, Arizona, and I would love for you to share a little bit more about biomed. But here, I just couldn't believe that mold was such an issue. I
Mm,
really struggle with that. This is the desert. We're not going to have that here. A lot of the homes have flat tops, and it's a lot more common than people would realize. So that I know can make people have rashes, very itchy, severe brain fog, but so can Lyme. So the mold and the Lyme, did you heal from those simultaneously, or did you find one and then the other, or what was your experience like with Lyme and mold?
yeah, I grew up in a house where my parents had built a brand new house, and they were like, to get, as the oldest child, I was like, I want to live in the basement. So I would tell you that I probably was exposed to mold, and growing up on a farm, we'd play in these barns that were 100 years old. I would have told you that I was probably exposed to all these things on some level, probably more virulent strains as a child. And that, again, it was just the tipping point.
Mm-hmm.
I would have told you that I was crawling around in bushes all day and playing on the farm, that I bitten by 100 ticks. Who knows? But it was just again, it was like the barrel was full. I really believe that it's what's inside. It's like, because you can have four family members in the house, and I hear this all the time from people, that mom's bedridden, the dad and the kids are fine. So what makes is the mold worse for her? It's really,
Mm-hmm.
it's if you want agency over your health, then you have a special system that's hypersensitive, and that's your superpower, as opposed to not feeling like the victim all the time. But mold is ubiquitous on the planet. There's so many, the equivalent of hundreds of biomasses of whales of mold produced every single year, that it's synonymous with the world. There's very few strains that are virulent and really pathogenic. So I do think it's a problem, but it's also like my immune system was so on edge. My nervous system was so traumatized by all the other shit that I'd been in. Like, I had this hyper elevated response, but it's because it was me. So yes, mold is a problem. Yes, you need clean air. It's more important that you actually have this biodiversity, just like my internal terrain,
Mm-hmm.
like that I want a diversity in the home. I really don't want a hyper sterilized home,
Right.
because that doesn't really help my immune system either. I should really be able to take these small hormetic doses of mold and impure air quality and environmental dust and skin cells, and I should be able to be, relatively fine. If you're not, you got to do two things. You got to meet the body where it's at and palliate the symptoms. But then you have to ask that. It's like going deeper. It's like, well, why am I having this? Why am I having this response that's so terrible? That doesn't mean we can live in black mold, but we have to listen. It made me crazy, because I thought in my head, I started to be like, I got to look out for mold. I got to look out for all mold. I got to check I was worried about my car, the seats in my car. I'm testing my air conditioning in my car, which can be moldy,
Mm-hmm.
you know, but you can reprogram and repattern your brain to not be that responsive to mold. And my favorite example of that is like the DNRS, a dynamic neural retraining system that Annie Hopper does, or the Reorigin that, oh, what's Ben's last name? Ben's program, Ben Ahern's. Those are great examples where you're going to work with the trigger, the mental trigger, unwind the confirming the biased story, and rewire your response to the trigger. And people walk out of those 5-day intensives with, they can go into a moldy building, or they can go into New York City with high EMF, and they rewire it in a very short amount of time. So it is real, and It's a signal that's unique to your supercomputer that's sitting in your brain. So
Yeah.
it's multifactorial.
Thank you for listening to the High Maintenance Hippie podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to the podcast, rate it, and leave a review, ideally a 5-star review if you loved it. All of this is free of charge and really helps me to be able to run the podcast. If you take a screenshot and tag me, I'll repost you and shout you out on Instagram. So tag Ashley Taylor Wellness and High Maintenance Hippie Podcast. If you have any feedback or guests that you'd like to have, I would love to hear from you so that I'm not just talking at you. I really want to deliver things that are valuable. So send me an email with any feedback, suggestions, or ideas for guests at ashley@ashleytaylorwellness.com. And I will leave you with a disclaimer. Please know that this is not medical advice or replacement for seeking medical care. Everything discussed on this podcast is for educational and informational purposes only. Always consult with your medical provider before making any changes. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.